بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
I read hadiths in Sahih Bukhari where it says about snaps, like the most heavily punished people will be photograph makers. So in this where currently where we stay, it's not possible to avoid photographs completely because you require photographs for everything. So how do we act on this hadith as well as be Sharia compliant?
That's a question that there's hadith in Sahih Bukhari that the people who will be punished maximum are the photograph makers. And today in this world we cannot avoid photography. Therefore, how do we reconcile the hadith? Whether there's nothing that you cannot avoid photography, but the interpretation, the translation of hadith is wrong. What the hadith says, the person who makes a tasveer, the musawwir, the person who makes a tasveer, he will be punished. Now, what is the meaning of a tasveer is to be understood. At the time of the Prophet, photography wasn't there. So there's a difference of opinion between the scholars whether the prohibition is on photography or other thing. There's one group of scholars, for example, who say that photography and videography both are haram. For example, Sheikh Al-Albani, he was a great scholar of the last century of hadith and a muhaddis. He says that still photography and videography both are haram, according to his understanding. The fatwa of Sheikh binbas, he says that still photography is haram and videography is permitted. Sheikh Huthaify, his fatwa is that as long as it doesn't go outside the fold of Islam, within the purview of the Islamic Sharia, still photography and videography both are allowed. Now all these three great scholars, they're great scholars, and they're the authentic scholars, alhamdulillah, and we respect all. But Allah says in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, in Surah Nahl, chapter 16, verse 43, that ask the person who knows. So these are great scholars of hadith, but photography is a science. And what they say, that since the Prophet said, tasveer is there, and today in Arabic, for photography also the word tasveer is used. But at the time of the Prophet, photography wasn't there. So what scholars say, because tasveer is mentioned, and today the word tasveer is used, photography, therefore photography is haram. See, the language keeps on developing. So we have to first try and identify what was prohibited in Islam. That's more important rather than the word, what it meant that time. So since that time photography wasn't there, you cannot say for sure that the word tasveer means photograph. Though today, in Arabic, the word tasveer is for photograph. So many of the words, for example, utilized at one particular time, it keeps on changing by the passage of time. Those scholars who say that photography is permitted, what they say, that what the Prophet prohibited is the hand painting. I'm not talking about those scholars who have gone way away from Quran Hadith. They say that sculpture is allowed and everything. I'm talking about the authentic scholars. There's a difference of opinion among the authentic scholars. What they say, that what the Prophet prohibited, what is done by hand. And the Hadith says that a person who makes a tasveer, makes a painting, Allah will ask him on the day of judgment that put life into it. But naturally they can't. So making a picture, a painting of these living creatures like animals and human beings is prohibited. What happens in photography is nothing but a reflection which is preserved on paper. Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he never prevented the Sahabas to look in a reflection in the water while combing their hair. He never prohibited them to look in a mirror. So looking in a mirror where reflection is there is not prohibited. In photography, the reflection is preserved. So scholars say that photography per se is not haram. But if you use photography for wrong things, like idol worship is haram. Using photography for obscenity, for pornography is haram. Using photography making a big blow-up of person, like Amitabh Bachchan, Gavaskar putting in a drawing room, that leads to idol worship is haram. So photography per se is not haram, but using photograph for wrong purpose is haram. So there are scholars, like Sheikh binbas, who say that still photography is haram and videography is prohibited. Now since we are in the field of media, I'm aware that videography, the shooting, is nothing but still photography moving at a speed of 25 frames per second or 24 frames per second. So when you move a still photograph at the speed of 24, 25 frames per second, it becomes motion. So to say that still is haram and moving is permitted, if someone can say that moving is prohibited and still is permitted, it makes sense. If someone says that beer is permitted and whiskey is prohibited, but if someone says whiskey is prohibited and beer is permitted, because whiskey has got more content of alcohol as compared to beer. So if you prohibit beer, but naturally whiskey becomes prohibited. So with this logic, what I say, to permit one thing which is lesser as compared to the thing which is much more higher. So still photography and videography. Videography is a higher version, advanced version of still photography. So therefore what I say, that these were great scholars, but because of their knowledge of science, they may not have referred to a person who's a scientist. I believe more with the fatwa of Sheikh Huthaify, who says that still photography and videography per se is not haram. And he says that on certain occasions which is permitted in Islam, it's allowed. Otherwise, normally making blow-ups is haram, or keeping big blow-up size photograph of great personalities that leads to idol worship is haram. So I agree more with scholars like Sheikh Huthaify. So therefore photography per se is not haram, but using photography for haram purposes is haram. Hope that answers the question, brother.